Let's look at for a moment, continuing to be empty like we are. Like, how would I do the play acting of being an individual? The ego is the idea of I am something. There is no boundless ego. So, if I was to now, from this emptiness, take on a boundary to be true about me. You see? So let's try and do that experiment which you said, that you can see the ego play out. You see? And maybe you notice that the minute you return to the seeing rather than the involvement with the boundary, then the strands of the ego are not so strong anymore. They start to thin out, and maybe for that moment, maybe even at a distance. No? So now I'm boundless. You see? Now, when I say I am boundless, for example, you see, who am I referring to? We are not saying Ananta is boundless. Ananta obviously can't be boundless. You see? Ananta is the name for this body-mind. And those of you who consider Ananta the Guru is just a name for your inner Sadguru presence. You see? So when it is said that I am that or I am boundless, is it referring to the separate individual entity? Because the ego is the idea of an entity. You see? So why do the sages then say that I am? Bhagwan said something very important on this matter. He said that till I am, no trouble. When I am something, that is when the trouble starts, and by definition then that is where the ego starts. But unidentified beingness is that same pointer from the sages saying just be, or just to remain empty of identification, empty of attachment. You see? So got a sense of it. One is a made up me, that I am so good, or I am so bad, I am enlightened, or I am bound. These are boundaries. Every construct that we take to be true about ourselves then becomes a boundary. You see? It's like saying that if I give you a task that for the next 2 hours, just imagine yourself to be somebody who lives in Barbados or something like that. You see, try to bring attention to thoughts about living on the beach in Barbados or something for 2 hours, and give that identification a name, gym, whatever, and you keep building on, oh, my family was like this, they came from the Bahamas, I need to take a holiday. But so then in 2 hours, there will be some identification, some conditioning around the Jim who is from Barbados. You see? So it's like, in a way, saying you watch a movie which you find the character very relatable, and then the movie is over, and then somebody comes and tells you, oh, in the sequel of this movie, this one dies. So then you say, oh, that hurt. How? You see? Because there's identification, there's conditioning around that identity, so that I am something less than. So I am Bala, I am a father, I am at work, I am, this is my money, this is my house, this is my family. All of these attributes then become the conditions which define the ego. So the ego is basically a set of conditions being believed in by, we'll come to the by in a moment, but for the moment it is fine to say that if there was not a single condition being bought, there is no separation, there is no ego. So empty of that, and that is in a way the exercise that we're doing now also. The beauty of this exercise is in unattachment, non-grasping, is that it doesn't matter whether you have 1,000,000 conditions or you have only 2 or 1. You see, when you're empty of all of that. So as high as the highest sage in that moment, we are. You see, so whether you're Bhagwan or you're just little old me, when you're empty of conditions, you are the same. You see? Now, this part is clear for everyone? So the ego is a name for attachment or belief in our conditioning, and then that when we are oppressed in that, when we are in the mental prison of this conditioning, of these limitations, then when our expression seems to operate under that burden, then we say that person's being egoic, or I was being egoic, or I am being egoic. Okay? So this is when we are egoic. Now, we just said that empty of all of that, we are the same. Okay? Now, what is that sameness? Have we ceased to exist? We haven't ceased to exist. Even perception is here. You're hearing, you could be empty. You could not be identifying with the body, and yet the centrality of this visual perspective may continue. All of this world may be perceived, and yet you're not identified. You're not being egoic. You see? So that being, empty of being something, is called the I am. You see? So that is the I am, because I am. Even this, somebody says, so who's perceiving? Now, unless we become very intellectually Advaitin, like with the innocence of a child, you ask them, so who's looking at this hat? Or who sees this hat? They will say, I am. You see? Even before, like a very young age, when they just start to speak, 11 months, 12 months, what age do they start to speak? I'm becoming old. So, they will respond in those innocent ways, you see? But empty of any conditions or pride or sense of ownership in that moment. You see? So, empty of all identification. If I was to say who's aware of this perception, you say, I am aware. You see? But that I am is not adulterated by conditions of pride, of unworthiness, of any of these ideas. So you're empty of the ego and you're just being. And that being is whose being? It belongs to I. But that I is the I of reality, is it? The I of awareness. So that pure awareness, which is aware, it doesn't change even in sleep state. Then the adjunct of am wakes up within that, and in the light of this I amness, then the world appears. You see? And the world appears, then all these play of light and sound happens, and also in the play of light and sound, one play is that of these mental constructs, language in our head, which is offering us these proposals that I am something, I should be better, I can learn this, I can. So attaching to those, as harmless as they may seem initially, like I like green coconut better than brown coconut. It may seem like, what's so egoic in that? You see? But notice that, it happened because when I was a child, I had this tree. You see, so the whole narrative is stuck in the most harmless seeming notions. So to remain empty, innocent of even that, is to remain empty of ego. You see? So this I, which is pure awareness, then gives birth to this am, which is pure being, I am. It is I am. See, nobody says, I was asleep, but then somebody woke up. They say, I woke up. It's most natural to say, I woke up. Because it is the I itself in its manifest aspect as being, as am, which arises. Suddenly the light comes on. Nobody knows how, nobody knows when, nobody knows why. It just comes. This I am comes. You see? Now in this I am, imagine a world in which it was impossible to identify. This world just wakes up. Everything is. But then some may have a complaint against the game designer saying, it's nice, visually nice, but it's not relatable. You see, like we see many movies, we call them art films or something. You see, which may look, even some of them don't look visually nice, but suppose it's visually very compelling, but it didn't have a narrative you could resonate with. You see, so our primitive, lame sounding theory is that entertainment without relatability was not enough juice for God playing this game. God said, let me make it so that when I play the game, not only do I have the body of James Bond or whoever, I also have a narrative that I have been given this mission, I have to rescue this country or this prime minister of this country, I have to save the world in this way. You see? And in that, picking up the narrative, this I am takes up the idea that I am James Bond or whatever. In the same way, we are playing the same game. I am Ananta, I am Bala, I am this, I am that. And now, to not identify, to have no narrative, no mission, then what happens? The narrative of the game still continues. Like you stop paying attention to the subtitles doesn't mean the subtitles of the movie will stop. They may stop at one point, but initially it will seem like the narrative continues. But that narrative is designed to make you identify as the character in the game, as the character around which the game seems to be centered, out of whom you seem to be perceiving this world. But that is the same for the dream, that we seem to be perceiving a world out of the central perspective of this character. So to be free from that identification, from that one, is to be free from the ego. But the I, so that is why the sages have said, Bhagavan said, I removes the I and yet remains the I. So that is impossible for the mind to understand, isn't it? It removes the false I, the I am something, the egotism is removed, and yet the true I, the Nirguna Brahman, that is our true reality, remains. That is why it's called self-realization. It's still the self, but it's not a limited self, it is not an egoic self. The difference between big S self and small s self is very big. Got a sense of what I'm saying?